Good morning, it's a beautiful day. Thank you for choosing to spend it with us. I'm your host, Jon Cox, and this is the Core Keyword Podcast. Joining me on the panel for today's episode is the producer, Don Plumlee, our four-armed overlord, Peyton Preece, and the Reddit-famous captain of the Hogs of War, defender of the realm of Ultramar, McCragg's favorite son, Daddy Smurf himself, Howard Watts. On today's show, first the panel will reflect on March Madness, a 48-person grand tournament in Jacksonville, Arkansas. Then, on Touching Grass with Ben, building healthy habits for a healthy win rate. And finally, the panel returns to talk a bit about what a return to Index Hammer might look like. So sit back, relax, and grab some snacks. So before we get into talking about toy soldiers, we just wanted to take a minute and talk about something a little more human. 3 days ago, a tornado went through Little Rock. I'm sure you've seen it on the news. There were lots of injuries and casualties, lives and homes destroyed. The touchstone for us here is that the event we're about to talk about was run by the guys at Centar. We know a lot of the guys that live up in Little Rock, and we have heard that there was some damage to their store. We try to get a hold of them and get an update before next time, but we just wanted to let them know that we're thinking about them, we're pulling for them, and we hope that things get back to a sense of normalcy as soon as possible. So March Madness, right? 48-person grand tournament, Jacksonville, Arkansas. And for a lot of our guys, this was their first experience with Games Workshop-style terrain. And that had a big learning curve for quite a few of us. We didn't really have too much experience with it. It was great to get out there and meet the Centar guys and get some reps on the terrain set. So Peyton, when you looked at the player pack and you saw GW terrain, how did that shape your expectations for the event?
So I knew the meta coming into this, and I knew GW terrain would in fact impact this type of meta. The 12 by 12 grids that the terrain is placed on is going to cover a ton of the board. It's going to cause big firing lanes with fast shooting, and it's going to be light cover everywhere. So I wanted to make some concessions in my list to make sure I covered the impact of the light cover being everywhere and what armies I expected to see. So this looked like for sure settling on GSC, since they could had tons of ways to ignore the light cover benefit that basically every enemy model would have on this type of terrain format. And I ended up taking things like Webbers in all my squads because of how GW formats benefits power armor armies specifically, especially looking at things like Thunderhammer Storm Shield Terminators, guaranteeing being on 0-up saves, wanting things like Webbers to really even out the matchup, and going with bikes to be able to threaten the speed to clear the GW terrain pieces, be able to see the entire board is some of the definite concessions I made to build better to GW terrain.
So you went into this event looking at it with the perspective of someone who has a legitimate chance to win any event you go to. Which armies did you expect to have to go through to get to the finals?
So knowing the local meta of the event and the format we were playing in, I knew I would definitely have to go through Howard Watts with his Ultramarines. I knew I would be having to go through some Demons in Brent. And then I knew I would have to go through a bunch of Space Marines. The main concern, of course, being the Dark Angels Terminators. Those were my main three concerns that I really was looking at when building my list for this type of matchup. It's one of the big reasons why I ended up keeping the pure strains with They Came From Below in my list. It opens up a ton of play into both the Zinch Demons and into Space Marines, being able to pick up the forward deploying pieces and go back into reserves, resisting a trade and being able to pick up infiltrators. My apologies. And to get away from that deep strike denial. And like I said, I ended up taking those Webbers because they really, really help the Dark Angel Terminator matchup.
So lots of tech for Dark Angels, lots of tech for Space Marines. Did you end up hitting either of those?
So I did, round 5, I ended up playing into Dark Angels, and I did end up playing into Brent's Zinch Demons. I also played into a Space Wolf player round 4, but that was less of a concern because there weren't any Terminators in that build. And so the reason that is a concern for GSE is they generally have AP 1 and 2, so those one-up armor saves can be a concern.
Right. Especially on the 12-inch by 12-inch plates where everything's, but you're ignoring cover, so.
So those are just the thoughts that I had when looking at those three major events. Most events I go to, I look at what I expect to be the top 3 meta armies I need to be able to guarantee at least have a 50-50 into if I'm trying to at least podium. And so, like I said, I took Weber's to help with the power armor matchup, and I wanted to keep the pure strains in the list because they help with my turn 1 pressure to keep Zinch Demons honest and to remove infiltrators as early as possible without trading.
Now, when you looked at the player pack and you saw that one of the map styles had been excluded, how did that cause you to adapt?
Okay. So, because that the 9-inch cutout variant of the deployment maps were not in this player pack, I knew that a lot of the really aggressive melee armies were going to be at a disadvantage on this map, combined with the fact that GW terrain, more so than any other terrain format, really benefits fast guns. I knew that we were going to see mobile gun lines was going to be the format that I was walking into. So I wanted to build a list that could combat that properly.
So you said that you feel like aggressive melee armies are going to be disadvantaged and that mobile shooting was going to be advantaged. When you say mobile shooting, we've got someone here who plays a list that was actually fairly mobile shooting, Mr. Howard Watts. So how did you feel that your mobile shooting played out on this? Did you feel like you were as advantaged as Peyton says you were?
So this is like my first time playing GW terrain, and I was not used to the big templates. So especially when they come to like a really sharp point, that gives you initially very small firing lanes to shoot through. And I can't remember if it was Peyton and I, or maybe it was me and somebody else were talking about kind of like the MVP of the weekend and stuff, but I had brought 3 Landspeeder Tornadoes, and the move 16 to be able to move into an objective, or rather move into a terrain feature and unlock that terrain feature to have true line of sight was huge. The majority of my other stuff is just Dreadnoughts, and they move 8, but once you kind of get to turn 2 and 3, you're moving into terrain features and being able to unlock that line of sight. But yes, being able to move quickly was definitely an advantage.
So what sort of effect did that have on your game plan overall, the GW terrain?
So I really initially just kind of went into it with the same kind of mindset. I have a game plan, right? That game plan, because Marine secondaries are a little bit pushed right now, is March from a Crack, which is an Ultramarine specific one, in the same one as like banners and all that is a Shadow Ops one. Codex Warfare, everybody knows what Codex Warfare does. I have a lot of heavy weapons in my list, right? So getting 2 points for each kill and shooting with heavy weapons is not too difficult. And then also Oath of Moment with the change for being in the middle, being worth 2 points again, which actually kind of synergized with the Landspeeder Tornadoes. The earlier iteration of this list had Hammer Strikes, which are 50 points more, per model, right? So throwing 125 points out in the middle of the field to just die the next turn, it's not quite as good as throwing 75 points out there. So not only did the Tornadoes have the speed to unlock some of the terrain features for shooting, they also kind of synergized with my secondary choices as well.
Did you find that you used them more for that trading piece or for that points generation? Word.
So on the first map, like with it being scouring, like the objectives are so condensed anyway. I was like, my whole army's going to be on the middle of the table. So for the scouring, I more used them for what they are, right? Redeployed them because I got first turn. I was able to push them around the flanks, and was able to use that speed to kind of unlock some of the terrain features and get shots onto some VO10 bikes and some other little gribblies that were behind the terrain features, not in cover. The second map, y'all are gonna have to remind me. I can't quite remember what it was.
The second game was Bombs.
Right. So bombs, very much the same thing with there being a central objective. I'm going to be moving toward the middle of the table anyway. A lot of times, like the speeders or the or eliminators rather that I use are really shine on maps like Data Scry Salvage, where there's not a central objective, right? So you're not necessarily staging in the middle on an objective because it's not there, right? So having something that can either move, shoot, move, advance, move, shoot, or just have move 16 and can just, with the fly keyword, just hide behind a ruin and just jump out, get its shots, and score 2 points. Like, tornadoes, I think, are just generally fantastic for their points, but there's a lot of synergies within the Space Marine Codex for secondaries, and I just tried to either use them to put them in the middle for Oath of Moment on like turns 1, or on maps that didn't have a centralized objective, or using them for their speed, like I said, to unlock terrain features to have those shooting lanes.
So did you, Peyton said that he made quite a few different adjustments to his list to account for things like Dark Angel Terminators. Was there anything that you did in yours to account for that?
So, and actually, Peyton and I talked about this at length too. So Ultramarines have the Seal of Oath, right? So it's our literally don't leave home without it relic. For those that may not know what it is, Seal of Oath is a relic. So a character, it projects a 6-inch aura, right? So any core or character units within 6 can reroll all of their hits and all of their wounds against whatever unit or individual model or whatever that I pick at the beginning of the battle after I know who goes first. So in my head, I was thinking, well, going against Dark Angel Terminators, I can use that to potentially kill Terminators a little bit more efficiently than other armies that don't have that that amount of rerolling wounds. And then also, this is more of it just came out, and I like really wanted to kind of hobby it up and get it on the table. I did have a Brutalis Dreadnought with the Talons, right? So that base has 5 attacks, so 6 attacks on the charge. You can always might have heroes it to have 7. I mean, you're going to be hitting on 3s, rerolling everything with Gilliman, and then it's rerolling wounds. So on 7 attacks, you're getting 5 or 6. 6 is probably being a little bit aggressive in my estimate, but I mean, you're getting 5 or 6 wounds that it's D3 plus 3 damage. So even if they do have an apothecary, like you're likely min 4 damage, you're not saving very many Terminators on that. So having that and just having Melta that, sure, I can only wound you on a 4, but every time I wound you, if I'm in half range, and you fail your save, like it's just a dead Terminator. I think it's just more of an all-comers approach that I think because of my faction, I have just the opportunity to have a little bit more efficient shooting into it.
So you relied on your overall efficiency and your strong secondaries. Peyton relied on his strong secondaries and mortal wound guns. Don, you're also playing a faction that has mortal wound guns, but you just got hammered with that Nerf bat. So I think it's fair to say that you probably felt pretty disadvantaged going into this event.
Sure. And probably most clown players, rely on their depth of skill to carry them through. I don't have that. So, I relied on my teammates and the experience that we have around the table, right, to help me build a really strong list that, like Peyton said, kind of caters to the terrain. Like, I had a fast gun line. I had high AP and high damage shooting to deal with, like Terminators and Knights and chonky, stupid things that are hard for elves to kill. And I had thought about the process of, like how we utilize this terrain. Admittedly, did not understand it on the level that clearly Ward and Peyton did. But this was my first event on GW terrain. I'd had 3 or 4 practice games into it. Some of those were more educational than others, as some some games are and some aren't. So there was a steep learning curve coming into this event.
Yeah, I completely understand, buddy. I was in the same boat you were in. I had put it on TTS and got maybe 2 reps playing against one of my buddies. So I had no idea what I was walking into. But you did mention Knights earlier, and you had a bit of a banger of a game against Knights there for a bit, didn't you?
Yeah, no, it started off really good. I felt like I deployed really strong, and that Jordy got first turn. He couldn't activate on anything, right? Like even with that huge 12 or 14-inch movement it is with his bondsman traits, he couldn't get an activation on any targets, which I was stoked with, right? But he did get first turn, which leaves me disadvantaged right out the gate. He moved out really aggressively. I took that as my go turn, and I pushed out to really cut the forces down that I was dealing with, right? I spent 5 CP, maybe 6 at that point, which was every CP I had in the bucket. Dropped a bunch of troops out of transports, went go turn with all the fusion pistols, all the neurodisruptors, which unfortunately don't mortals on vehicles, so that's a big kick in the nards, but whatever. And then we threw into our charges with our mortal wound strats and all that jazz. Unfortunately, maybe I got a bad batch of event dice, or maybe I just not good at rolling dice. Like, it's debatable. Rolled really, really cold. And Jordy rolled super duper hot, so my go turn went absolutely nowhere. Whereas in my math, I feel like average I pick up the 4 knights I engaged on. I probably should have not split my attacks and positioned more intelligently and engaged on 3 and picked them up instead of leaving 5 knights at 3 or 5 wounds. And as you can well imagine, in that scenario, when you've positioned poorly with GW terrain, which segue back for a second, GW terrain gives you fantastic coverage until you touch that terrain piece, in which case it gives you none. So it's a real like flip of the coin of like, I am totally safe or now I'm dead, right? And that was the point of the coin flipped from being totally safe to being completely dead, and my army evaporated.
I understand that is the thing, yeah. Well, so is Knights really just that bad for Harlequins? Peyton, you also play Clowns. Is Knights really just, is it the worst matchup for Clowns?
So I don't think it's the worst matchup, but it is definitely up there. The anti-tank weapons in Clowns is extremely volatile and unreliable, combined with how much damage 2 there is in the Codex. The abundance of -1 damage in Knights is extremely brutal. Combine that with somewhere between 7 and 10 move 14 counters 5 obsec models when you are a faction that wants to trade objectives with people inside transports. They trade objectives better than you. Makes the matchup incredibly challenging.
Sounds like a suboptimal situation to find yourself in.
It felt that way, yeah.
Well, I'm kind of interested to see what the loadout on his big knight was, to see if that was impactful.
It could have been more impactful, Ward, if he hadn't have just completely wiped my army out in his turn 2 with all of his armatures, and then his big knight just got to play cleanup on my couple hard-hitting characters that did so much work through the rest of the weekend, so I'm not going to talk too much smack on them. But they were just on siesta that game, I guess. I don't know. They did nothing.
Listen, it's because Jordy's army's gorgeous, right?
It was. The LEDs stunned them. I don't know.
Yeah. He's got all those marker lights on his Mandalorian knights. Well,
Well,
but
in having played against Harlequins with, I wouldn't call it that similar of a list, like, but having like run Dreadnoughts into Harlequins, they can just whiff because one, the range is incredibly small. Like they're extremely short range, you know, and it's like if you can see it kind of coming. I mean, it's 6-inch range, so if one or two Helverins is about to get blapped, you can rotate one for a 4-up invuln, and you can transhuman the other. So I mean, it's just literally cutting that efficiency down each time those shots are coming in. So
It certainly is. Yeah, he did exactly that to me, Ward. Yeah, and it was rough because, as you mentioned, the guns are so short range that you pigeonhole yourself. Like, you have to, right? Like, you have to commit on these targets.
right.
And into an army like that, he's just like, well, you committed, so, I mean, here you go.
Yeah, and you can always, like, it's just so swingy, right? Melta, you gotta love it when it works, but when you roll that one, you're like, oh man.
So yeah, I mean, Ward hit the nail on the head, right? Like, if you go in with Meltas, right, and your whole damage basis is Melta. So I fired 12, I think, fusion pistols into those armatures, into an assortment of armatures that round. 3 of them actually went to the wound phase. All 3 of those did less than 4 damage. And when you have -1 damage, that 4 goes to a 3, the 3 goes to a 2. It's like you didn't even touch them. And your go turn goes from picking up 3 knights to picking up nothing. And that's essentially the game, right? Like,
and then the very next round, you find yourself staring down the barrel of another super durable army in Death Guard.
yeah, no, exactly. With Death Guard with Mortarion on the table, which was pretty intimidating for me. I've never played it with this style of a list. The only time I played into Mortarion was with ultra pushed psychic Tyranids, so my perception on his durability is skewed, we could say. But yeah, going into that matchup was pretty concerning. The whole army's -1 damage. My whole army is basically 2 damage. That's bad. Some things that I do have in my favor in that matchup are just extreme maneuverability. I just outmove everything to the nth degree. Like, you can't even begin to keep up. The only thing that comes near touching me is the flotilla barge of bloatwing thingies. I don't know, whatever. And being able to just catapult a couple characters into the center line, turn 1, kind of giving them the old salute and send them on their way to die, was huge, right? Like, it picks up centerpiece support characters from the Death Guard army, the Plague Caster, the Tally Master, things like that. Gets rid of those key units that are really building the interaction between his forces, right? And then from there, try and screen out the handful of fast-moving units and just live long enough to gain points. I don't know.
So it sounds like you were quite a bit more precise with your movement in this game than you were in the game for you. Self-admittedly, you just got blapped on Jordy's turn too.
Yeah, I learned, I might not be the brightest dude around, but I do learn pretty quick. And especially when you receive a spanking of that caliber, I think that it kind of sticks in your mind a little, right? Like, you're like, that's not happening again.
Absolutely. So, do you think that with your speed on this terrain set, because going back to Peyton's earlier comment about fast shooting armies are advantaged, you were able to leverage the fact that you were faster and just use the guns? I mean, you could be everywhere, right? But Death Guard has the ability to just live at you.
So in that matchup, you really have to commit, and you have to be cagey about your commitment, because the Meltas aren't your key point, right? Like, Meltas are great there, but nothing in that army, not much in that army, is greater than 3 wounds. So screw it. Everything's -1 damage. Who cares? Just throw all of the shots at something. Part of his points generation was based explicitly on Poxwalkers. So one of my first turn maneuvers was to just throw a couple boats into one of those units, and then the boat that survived I chucked across the board into the other unit, and just eliminated a secondary, basically, from the game. And being able to do that, it essentially gives me a 15-point advantage, right? Like right off the gate. Like you're not going to get this secondary. And being able to know that and just recognize it, then you can concentrate more on what's important. And like, I don't need to max all 3 of these secondaries. I need to get 40 on my primary and 40 on secondary, and I'm going to pull this game. And you can really kind of change and reevaluate like where you're scoring those points and what you need to stop as far as their points generation. And at that point, I controlled primary, and canceled out Mortarian's effectiveness and just picked up what I could. Like I didn't focus on trading at all. I just focused on points generation and limiting his effectiveness. And by turn 4 or 5, gotten 25-ish or something on primary and almost nothing on secondary. And so it's just a game of controlling the points, right? Like I don't need to kill you. I don't care if you live. I'm just going to control these points. And part of that is learning from the previous experiences of the 2 losses before that. And part of it's just recognizing the matchup advantages, right? Like Knights are super durable and hard to kill, but they also move 14 and take all the objectives. Death Guard's super durable and hard to kill, but I can control the entire pacing of the game, and I just need to do that.
So going back to the assumptions that we're making based on the player pack and the train setup, the comment that aggressive melee armies were disadvantaged, I did notice when I was going over the results that word you played into World Eaters. And did that assumption bear out, that aggressive melee armies were disadvantaged?
Well, so we actually talked about this at lunch. One, the primary conversation was, what do I put Seal of Oath on? Because since Angron is although he can kill anything he touches, he equally dies in turn. I was like, well, I can get a lot of value using that if he keeps coming back, or I could put it on something else. So I can't remember what it's called. Brass Scorpion? No, it's not Scorpion. Lord of Skulls.
Lord of Skulls.
So I ended up putting it on the Lord of Skulls. And, after that, I mean, with defensive focus, like I'm uniquely advantaged into most Marine armies, unless you can turn off Overwatch. You got to charge me, and everything's going to be within 6 inches of each other. So I ended up doing a large number of wounds to Angron on the way in, and I think the only thing that I'd given him was like a speeder, so he whacks the speeder. But the terrain layout on that, like the objectives were pretty well in the open. Like you were either on the terrain feature in front of a ruin, moving to toward one of the objectives, or you were right out in the open on the objectives. And the World Eaters, although when they make it into combat, dude, they slap. But when you have to, and it was abandoned sanctuaries, so when you're walking 24 inches across the board or 12 inches to the objective out in the open in front of a gunline army that also punches pretty good too with its dreadnoughts and with Gilliman, and it was really just kind of a shooting gallery. Like I felt bad because the guy was a great player. I mean, like he managed to make it to I think there's 3 wins and 1 tie, so I mean effectively undefeated, and having not had really any experience in the World Eaters, I was like, I wasn't really sure how it was going to go. But of course, it's a meme for us. Like I don't know how the matchup goes, and I think that I'm like disadvantaged, and then I score 100 points. So,
right. Do you think that matchup plays out any differently on a different terrain layout? Was the final score influenced almost entirely by it being GW on abandoned sanctuaries, where all 4 of those, the main objectives, all 5 of them were sitting in the open? Do you think that looks different on a different terrain pack, or is that just the way this one plays out?
So, I think it would. I really do think it would have been different. The basically my first turn was redeploy, use Seal of Oath to kill the Lord of Skulls, right? And I mean, it can't be obscured anyway, and it's a huge model. So I don't think in that sense it would have mattered what terrain layout it was, unless there was obviously like a huge, 8-9 inches tall, L-shaped, ruin that it could literally not have true line of sight to actually be able to see to shoot it. But I mean, the another thing that was absolutely ridiculous about World Eaters, and he was not having a good time, as in like his models were just dying and dying and dying. But that dude still scored 40 points on secondaries.
Yeah, their secondaries are just a gimme. Like,
man, it was nuts.
You just need blood tithe points and you get 15 on one of them. Like, it's crazy. You get another one just for dying near an objective or killing things near an objective, I think. Their secondaries are quite nearly an auto 35 to 40.
I mean, he was spending blood tithe points to bring Angron back. He was spending blood tithe points to get I can't remember if it's 2 for 3 or 3 for 3, whatever the conversion is, but so, man,
I think it's 5 for
score
3?
15 on whatever it was. I was like, man, this dude's going to get a 15 on Blood for the Blood God, or a Pile of Skulls. I think it's Pile of Skulls is that one. But it's like, man, with the number of units that we had between us, like, and he was killing my vehicles. I mean, because that's the majority of my list. So I mean, he took Bring It Down and killed the majority of my stuff, or not Bring It Down. No, he took all the World Eater ones. Blood Tithe, or Pile of Skulls.
But one of them is essentially kill things.
Yeah.
Like, you get points for killing enemy units or for dying.
And and it was...
So it's like, it's Bring It Down or no prisoners, but on both ends. Like, I threw something at you, I kill you, I get a point. You kill me, I get another point. It happened on an objective, I get an extra point for each action. Haha!
Well, and even like, and it was almost like a triumphant moment for me when I ended up killing his Lord of Skulls, but he's like, cool, I get 2 blood tithes because it's a Titanic vehicle, and I'm like, what? Like, anyways, kind of to go on a tangent, kind of go back to what the question was. I think if there's a little bit more like ruins where he could kind of move up or advance, or if I don't kill the Khorne Berserker units that he had, right, and they roll a 6, all of a sudden they're moving in behind cover, right, as long as it's toward the nearest unit. But I mean, he could have easily lined that up. And
so, Ward, with to talk about like how the terrain differential might be, we generally play into a lot of first floor line of sight blocks, right? And maybe the Lord of Skulls doesn't benefit for that. But how do you feel about the rest of that army into a board that's heavy with first floor line of sight blocks? Is that a different?
Oh yeah, I mean, it'd be terrifying. And I know a lot of the lists online have been running kind of like heavy. What's it called? Exalted 8-bound or 8-bound?
Yeah, the Exalted 8-bound.
Yeah, and like I know that those guys are even more so like slapping combat. So, I mean, and granted, not like taking into account the terrain, and if it was a little bit more dense or not GW terrain, and it wasn't Abandoned Sanctuary. If he was in Belcatis, not on Abandoned Sanctuary, and then got to move his entire army, or however many units you get to move up.
That's 2.
Like, moving up 2 melee units, then just, I get to take my turn now, and then all of a sudden, now, not only am I contending with a Lord of Skulls, and, other stuff like that, it's also, I have, like, melee in my face pinning me in my deployment, turn 1, so, like, that would be very scary for sure.
You mentioned leveraging your redeploy on this map specifically. Did you really have to lean on your redeploy on GW terrain?
So in my first game, I did for sure. I was playing against Votan, and actually I was playing against John Montgomery, and that is not somebody you want to see on the first round pairings. I remember when it went up, and I was like, oh my God, I got Big John. Like, and we know this because we're from Arkansas, and we've come to play at Centar before, but he is he has thoroughly put me through the paces
He's a
with
great
other
dude.
armies, and he has beaten me a number of times. It's like, well, I don't know anything about Votan, and John's a good player, so I'm about to get slapped. Fortunately, I was able to get the first turn, and the Invictors kind of showed their, their S tier rating in my book for Ultramarines, because I was able to start 9 inches away from his deployment zone, and I was able to move 10 inches into his deployment zone. His bikes with their pregame move weren't able to get away from me because of the terrain. The moment you walk into the template, like, everything opens up. So I was like, oh wait, I have huge line of sights with my Invictors. So I had deployed defensively with my other assets, tornadoes and eliminators, all my dreadnoughts and stuff. It's like, well, I can't just get shot by a Hecaton land fortress, because at that time I thought that was really the only shooting threat that Votan had. Boy, was I wrong.
Come to find out.
Yeah, come to find out. Yeah, that's no doubt. So actually, when I redeployed, I just put literally, and it was scouring. So keep in mind, like, all the objectives are super condensed. I'm like, I'm spending 6 CP, or 4 rather. I'm redeploying 6 units. I picked all 4 of my dreadnoughts up, and like a couple of the characters that have command phase, like 6-inch or 3-inch restricted buffs. So it's like, cool, these guys are going to be right next to the dreads, so that Tigerius can hand out a -1, so that one of the dreads can hand out a +1 to hit, or the Techman can hand out a +1 hit to the dreads, and cool. And I'm just going to jam everything up the middle. Game 2 was against demons. I had second turn against demons, so I was really kind of scared that he would end up getting like a long charge off with his bloodletters and killing my infiltrators. So I just redeployed them back to safety and kind of conceded the board, and was like, well, I got to make a play for March from Crag in turn 4 or 5, right? That's, I'm just going to take a mental break from March from Crag on the first, second, and third turn, and then try to make a play 4 and 5, because it has in-game scoring as well. So really leaned into kind of like aggressively deploying my assets forward. Oh, I didn't get to go first. Pull those and pull the Invictors back. Turn 3 was into Emissary Custodes, so we actually kind of had an interesting, and actually, and I didn't mean to interrupt Peyton, because he was I believe round 3 he was playing Brent, and that was a very, it looked like very serious when I walked up, but they were gracious enough to help me with the ruling on who has to redeploy first. So anyways, I redeployed first because I had the first turn, but then he was able to hide everything except for 1 unit of Virtus Praetors, which I was able to seal and then subsequently kill. So being able to redeploy or counter redeploy and get guns online with something like Seal of Oath in the Custody matchup, and taking those, D3+3 Meltas Sava launchers off the table, it's a big deal. Round 4 was against Brent. The redeploy is always really important and I think in the demon matchup, particularly if you're playing any number of Invictors in Ultramarines, because you're putting them on the line. Like this is your opportunity to. Excuse me. This is your opportunity.
So I have a question. Sure. Do you think that you'd be more advantaged into that dreaded demon matchup if you switched off your babies, your favored sons, and you played a different Marine chapter?
I really.
I know it's heresy. Don't shoot me. I'm just asking.
Like, I really don't know. And I don't know anything about Space Wolves or Dark Angels, like any of the quote non-codex compliant chapters. So the majority of my stuff would be, yeah, all the good ones. So the thing is, like, in a full Zinch army, like, you need to make it into melee, right? Like, you need to have stuff that can go across the board and make it into melee. Like, I think depending on the terrain layout or density, right, I think White Scars probably would have a pretty decent shot into something like Zinch Demons, as long as they don't just get, flamered off the table or whatever. Or if they're able...
Well, they have access to the advance and shoot, right, as well as the advance and charge.
Yeah, so it's like...
Right, so they could predictably do 2 phases of reliable damage into 2
well,
different...
let's be fair, right? The 3-up demon save makes nothing in shooting reliable.
As reliable as you can get into a 3-up demon save.
Right,
All right, whatever.
But the important thing, I believe, to take from that comment is that you are roughly as fast. You're not as fast. Like, the Flamers got you by 4 inches, I think, on their base movement. But, well, no, because you'd have jump packs and stuff. I mean, like, you're as fast, if not faster, with, like, Vanguard Vets or whatever assets you're bringing in a White Scars list. I just don't think White Scars are as good into the rest of the field. It's one of those dichotomies where it's like, I can kill this really good meta army, but if I don't run into that meta army, I'm going to lose to the field and never play that higher performing meta army.
Exactly. Something I kind of want to interject here is I've seen a lot of people confused about how Mono Zinch Demons is doing really well. Specifically in this format, they are in this perfect counter meta place of right now in Arch of Omen, good gun lines are king. And just having that 3-up demon save against guns is a huge advantage to that. Not to mention, because of how mobile and fast it is, it performs exceedingly well on GW terrain. And its secondary scoring is really, really good. So this Mono Zinch Demon build is a really good counter meta pick right now because the melee specific armies are suffering a little bit. So your natural predators are not really there.
So what you're saying is as long as you can avoid those disadvantaged matchups in like round 1 or 2, really, you're not likely to see them.
Exactly.
Sure. And it takes advantage of the 3-up demon save to counter the heavy shooting that's coming in from like the Iron Hands, guard, etc. Right? You're using your mobility to take advantage of the lack of mobility in the like heavy melee threats like Space Wolves, World Eaters, even White Scars to an extent, right? With their limited access to that heavy D3 damage or 3-up damage, right? Like even with the advance and charge. It's not until Assault Doctrine that they can reliably get D3 weapons, right?
And you also have to take into account like the secondaries that demons have too, right? Because if you want to compare one army's strengths and weaknesses to the other, right, you most certainly need to talk about the secondaries. And with reality rebels and despoilers and I can't remember what the other one they usually take, but demons have a good like suite of secondaries that they can take to keep them competitive in any matchup. So I just think that even their quote disadvantaged matchups aren't as bad as like Peyton and I call it like this is like a 25%er, this is a 30%er, a 40%er, right? I think demons are able to, even in their worst matchups, keep it to a 40 to 45 or coin flip matchup.
For sure. Particularly if they can rely on a depth of player skill and experience.
Coming on back around, since we were talking about how important redeploying was in the Ultramarines in those games, Genestealer Cult's entire game is deployment, basically. So, Peyton, how exactly did you find GSC and all of their deployment shenanigans on GW Train specifically?
It was interesting. Being able to use blips to either be inside simultaneously during... So, this is going to sound a little weird when I go in the description, but how I deploy the blips is I'm planning on going second and deploying the blips so that on the edges of the terrain piece itself, that it could be simultaneously inside and outside the deployment. depending on whether
Right,
I'm
because
inside
there's
the
nothing
train.
that prevents the blip from being inside the wall, right?
Right, so I can deploy on either inside the wall or behind it, depending on whether I'm going first or second, which gives me a huge advantage on the deployment because I don't have to, like what we're talking about, the advantage of being able to redeploy. You don't have to deploy cautiously because you don't know whether you're going first in the gun line or not. I can deploy so that I both have the advantage of going first, and if I end up going second, I'm able to deploy behind the 12-inch plate and be perfectly safe. Combining that with an actual redeploy mechanic inside with one of the stratagems, where you can redeploy 2 blips that were deployed aggressively to keep opponents off of you, and the Gene Stealer's free move when they reveal. And I had a character with every angle, so when his blip was revealed, he could choose to go back to strategic reserves. There was a lot of ways I was able to counter my opponent's deployment and turn 1 with being able to in deploying my own actual models.
Okay. So we're going to go once more around the panel, and everybody's going to give me their biggest takeaway from GW terrain. Okay. So we're going to start with Ward.
So having been like my first 2-day event on GW terrain, like I had played games into it, RTT games, right? But like, let's be honest, you go to an RTT to kind of workshop some of the stuff you're working on, or you might take something a little bit more fun, or ultimately you're just testing stuff, right? So like, you're not really getting into the nuances of the terrain set. However, after the event, it really made me think about, and Peyton can talk to this, like when we got done with our one of our super majors we attended last year at Flying Monkey Con, I really felt the lack of speed. Like I needed units to have speed with quality shooting attached to it. Obviously back then you didn't have the free reserves, so you couldn't just put stuff into reserves and come in on the board edges and get angles, right? But I was like, man, I like really needed some like a speeders, you know, or something like that to be able to move into the terrain or interact with these different terrain features. And that really showed in the Games Workshop terrain set, right? I was able to get into combat, or rather not get into combat. I was able to move within terrain features to open up whole swathes of the board for shooting lanes, and I was able to then, you know, interact with this the guys trying to hide behind objectives, right? Whether it be forward deploying with the Invictors, which I count as being a lot faster than they are, although 10 is not slow. Being able to forward deploy and take angles, to take really aggressive angles on stuff that normally, I mean, I don't think there's any other army in the game that has something quite like Invictors that can redeploy. I think that's pretty well specific to Ultramarines and to the shooting platform it is. But being able to have that and have speeders and be able to leverage those to be able to get shooting lanes and you know, unlock the big templates was my biggest takeaway, because normally you don't have those big plates. Like what you see is what you get for terrain, and either you can draw those lines or you can't. But when you unlock a huge plate, your shooting lanes become massive.
Yeah, from the bottom of my orc heart, Invictors can die in a fire. Moving on. Peyton.
You love them.
Yeah, so the biggest thing I took away was I knew going in that speed was going to be mandatory, but what I really hadn't considered enough was the level of durability needed to hold objectives. Because there isn't a way, on the majority of these maps, there was very, very, very open midfield objectives. It was where you were not able to hide your models. There you were just in the open. getting attacked. And with a vitality of 40k right now, you have to play either a multitude of units on an objective to hold it or very, very tough units. So that was one of the big things to take away from me, was a balance of speed and durability in an army to be able to hold objective, be able to shoot properly and hold objectives in GW format.
Okay, and Don, what was your major takeaway from GW Terrain?
Peyton, Ward, I think Brent too said it throughout the week and a half, 2 weeks of us hard prepping as a team to try and go to this event. It's simultaneously so much more and so much less obscuring terrain than what you're used to, right? And it's so hard to really wrap your mind around that until you've gotten 3 to 5 consecutive games into it. Because you deploy and you're I'm safe. Nobody can see me. And then you move a quarter of an inch, and now the entire map is visible to you, and you are visible to it. And that's a crazy dichotomy that is not present in many other terrain formats.
Yeah, that one definitely takes a little bit of getting used to. Okay, well, we're going to wrap up Section 1 right there. Please stay tuned for Section 2. Now, we all know it's hard to stay healthy on event weekends, but you're in your life every day. Here's Ben to tell us about how being healthy can help your win rate. You should listen to him. He plays dwarves, and dwarves are natural sprinters.
This is Touching Grass with Ben, where I, Ben, sit down and talk to you about the importance of physical fitness in 40K. This week, I'm going to focus on how physical fitness before and after and during, really, a tournament can help improve your personal standing. There's been plenty of studies done specifically with esports and with chess players to show that physical fitness is a key way of increasing your playability and functionality at a tournament or at a just in regular playing. The first study that I looked at says that it increased their concentration by 33%, and it reduced their anxiety levels by 43%. It also it uplifted their gamers' just general mentality, going from a more negative mindset to a more positive mindset by almost 20%. So you may be asking yourself, what is exercise actually doing to improve my mental capabilities at 40K? And the big thing is it stimulates cell growth in the brain and rapidly increases blood flow to the hippocampus and prefrontal cortex, which is a part of your skull, obviously part of your brain. And those mechanisms that enable us to better retain memories, process information, and problem solve quickly. Imagine yourself, you're sitting at a table, and obviously someone does moves their models in a space that you were not expecting them to, or pulls out a stratagem that you were not expecting to. Being able to rapidly respond to that change in game state can come from the ability of having your brain fully functioning. And so any kind of small gains that we can get, whether that's exercising outside, taking a break during the lunch period of game one, between game 1 and game 2 at a GT, or whatever it is, can help retain that initial focus that you have going into the game at first. There is the brain is, this is really an interesting fact that I found. The brain only makes up 2% of your weight, but it uses 20% of your energy, while your muscles make up 40% of your weight and are using the same amount when they're not actually exercising. So if you're sitting static, your brain is using the same amount of energy as your muscles while being only 2% of your total body weight. Now increase this now put your brain in a situation where it's having to function like a muscle, thinking quickly, critical thinking, all that good stuff. It is now producing your body. Your body goes into a state of cardio, essentially, like your heart rate elevates, your blood pressure skyrockets. And doctors have said that you burn roughly 560 calories sitting and playing chess over the course of 2 hours, and that is the same amount that Roger Federer would burn in a 1 hour tennis competition. Now, essentially, the main thing that really kind of got this for me was Norway's Magnus Carlsen. He has implemented a very strict diet and workout routine in order to be the best of who we all know is, at least I assumedly know, is the best chess player in the world, the best grandmaster of chess in the world. So what he does routinely during tournaments or really every day, he clears his mind with to strengthen his core, and he practices yoga for roughly 20 minutes. At tournaments, he drinks semi-chocolate milk to feed his brain and body the protein and the potassium and calcium and the right amount of sugars for a steady supply of energy throughout the day. And he optimizes sitting to reduce stress and increase alertness as the game hours pile up and his opponents start to fade out. Here's a direct quote from what Carlson has said. It says, "These long tournaments are quite tiring and long games are very tiring, especially at the end. If you are in good shape and can keep your concentration, you'll be the one who will profit from your opponent's mistakes. Games are lost or won in the final hours due to mistakes caused by fatigue." So ways that you can go about this, like I said earlier, is you can be taking the lunch break between game 1 and game 2, or even just a quick walk between game 2 and game 3, and even putting the clock on yourself, going outside, getting some fresh air. I personally, because I run a ton, I run an obscene amount of miles, actually go on a run during the lunch break. I order my food, I go out, hit 3 or 4 miles, whatever it is, come back, eat my food while we're setting up terrain or starting the next objective, the next mission. And so even if you're not in shape like I am, like no big deal. One, you can always get there. Whether it's essentially you shoot for 150 hours a week, which sounds like a lot, but it's actually only 30 minutes a day. I think that's how the math goes out. I'm really bad at math, so someone correct me if I'm wrong. But it's roughly 30 minutes a day of just mild to moderate exercise, whether that's walking, jogging, lifting weights, anything that can increase your mental capacity and sharpness and just general overall health and allow your brain to work in a better, more efficient way while you're playing the game of 40K, because we all know marginal gains make a big difference. If we can keep our strats straight, if we can keep our initial game plan upright and out front, and then we cannot get distracted by things that our opponent aren't necessarily doing, and we're able to respond quickly to what our opponent is actually doing in the game state, we can, towards the end of the tournament, game 3, game 4, game 5, whatever it is, even game 6, game 8, if you're going to some FLG or WTC events, you can still be thinking clearly and not losing focus and losing out on small gains that you can have in order to score those extra 1, 2, 3 points that you may need to flip an 81-83 game to an 84-83 game. So this has been your first Touching Grass with Ben, and I hope you enjoyed it.
And welcome back to part 3 of the Core Keyword Podcast. So, 10th edition is almost upon us. The rumors are that they could be doing a live play kind of showcase of some of the rules and stuff here in the next month. And that is a really impressive and aggressive timeline to try to be getting this out, I think. It points to kind of an early summer release, if they're going that hard on the rules this early. And GW really seems to be leaning into a literary concept called show, don't tell, with 10th edition, right? So if you look back at the last several codexes, World Eaters, Guard, and to a certain extent Demons, there have been a lot of things in those that we can point at and kind of project forward into 10th edition, like moving the regiment keywords out of the subfactions in Guard and moving them onto the data sheets and being more archetype driven with Born Soldiers and Mechanized Infantry. And then in the World Leaders book specifically, taking them down to where you have a single data sheet set for the army that's a 2-page spread, and that they are separate between the different army archetypes, which tends to feel, again, like they're leaning into more of an archetypal army construction set. So, do we expect to see stratagems on the data sheets? Very Sigmar-ish. I mean, I'm not opposed to that. Sigmar's rule set looks a lot better to me in certain instances. Their data sheets are a hell of a lot prettier, for one. I don't know. Peyton, what you got, man?
Yeah, so looking at forward at 10th, seeing the simplification of the stratagems and the chapter rules, something I'm pretty excited for. I am skeptically optimistic of Index Hammer. I remember back in the day of Abaddon and 120 Cultists. I remember back in the day the horrors of Razorwing spam.
Yeah, I was there for that.
So I do know that trying to balance 1,000+ data sheets at the same time is definitely a challenge, especially with no special rules to help balance out the weirder ones. But in general, I'm skeptically optimistic and very interested to see how they balance these archetypes. I very much like the moving to a more AOS style rule set. I really like the rule set the AOS has. I have one major hang-up in the double turn that's really kept me from playing that in any form of competitive fashion. But outside of that, I really like the rule set, and so moving more towards that, more towards a uniform rule set, has me really excited.
We have a really interesting mix here this evening because you and I have been through Index Hammer before, right? We've been through this. Ward has been through an edition change. Don, you haven't seen an edition change before, my guy. How are you doing?
I'm skeptically trepidatious.
Big words.
Yeah, no, I pulled out my thesaurus, so, it helps out. No, I started my competitive adventures in Warhammer at Melia Shiloh last year, so last February, right, would be my first real foray into, active competitive play. So obviously, all 9th edition. Dabbled in Age of Sigmar just enough to understand the core concepts. I do like the streamlined special abilities being pulled from stratagems and put on data sheets, right? I don't think that we're going to see just full on 1-to-1 stratagems to data sheet conversion, but I think we're going to see a lot of those niche abilities translate over, which I mean feels like that's a good move, especially with the reduction in CP overall. That felt bad, that change for the CP generation, right? When you lose 6 or 8 CP overall through the game. Feels bad when a lot of your special skills are tied to those points. But I'm worried that it takes away a lot of the uniqueness of the game, right? Everybody has these same abilities, everybody has access to the same ones all the time. Does that reduce decision points on what you utilize? That's kind of my concern.
Going off that, one thing I would really like to see limited in 10th edition, specifically about what Don just said, is that I don't think every army needs access to a transhuman-like effect.
Yes, please, dear God, get rid of that.
Just you, right? Just you,
Get rid of
right?
that.
I don't even need it to be me, right? But when every single faction has, because that I mean, it doesn't invalidate data sheets, but it literally directly impacts how you're going to build your lists and build your army. Because if you don't have stuff that can, wound on a 4, it's or have good reroll mechanics, you just, well, I guess my, all my plasma and all my stuff that's strength 16 will wound this. Insert whatever data sheet on a 4, right? And I mean, you're gonna fail half the time, and that sucks.
Transhuman physiology is my number one rule to just please get rid of it, make it go away, send it the way of the dodo. I don't want it anymore.
Yeah. So just building on what we're saying is there in 9th edition specifically. I can't recall if this happened in 8th edition as bad, but they seem to go and release a new rule and then replicate it 4 or 5 times the next books. So the best example I have for this was I was so pumped when Clowns finally got their book this edition. There's a really cool mechanic. They were really the first faction that had access to trans hitmen in this edition. It was really, really cool mechanic. Obviously, they were overtuned, but I really liked that this weird, magic-y, future-seeing army that played tricks on the enemy was really, really legitimately hard to hit because with capping modifiers, it was hard to replicate that. Then in the next 4 books, every single book replicated that ability. So it does take away from a lot of the uniqueness. That's something I'm hoping we can find a way, GW can find a way to do in this next edition, is give armies rules that feel like their army and not give it to everything.
I like specifically when it.
And at the same time, not break the game with that, right? Like give you a unique rule that they don't give to everybody else, that doesn't just make you the friggin' boogeyman of the meta, right?
And I like specifically, like Peyton said, if you can even, like if you read any of the lore, uh, Harlequins and Eldar are really, really difficult to hit. Like, so they should be, right? Like, and
Right.
I'm not a game designer.
You already
Yeah,
wound them
I'm
on
not a game
twos.
designer, right? I'm not advocating that I should be the one that makes these changes, right? But if you can take into account both of like the lore, how they look on paper, how you listen to them in books, and how you hear them portrayed, and can also then marry that with a rule set that reflects that has that uniqueness, I think you're only going to see it. People are going to be more interested in the game because you're going to have a unique flair to your army. You're going to have stuff that lines up with the book you read 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a couple months ago, and like, oh man, this is like really cool.
Well, not just that, Ward, but I think that's super healthy for like the competitive meta as well as the casual meta, right? Like, you can't force this variation in army construction without having a depth of opposition on the table, right? Like, things have to have uniqueness. Things have to have standout traits that make them difficult to play against and to stand out from other armies. Otherwise, you end up with cookie-cutter builds, kind of like where we're seeing right now at the tail end of Ninth of these really, really heavy mass fire gun lines with as much AP as they can manage through, right? Because that cuts through the AP negation that we're seeing on a lot of armies, and the damage negation that we're seeing on a lot of armies, and stacking those rerolls so that they can avoid those minus hit penalties and etc. Right? That all of the top armies are layering into their builds right now. And I think, like you guys are saying, forcing these unique traits and these unique aspects of different armies forces more varied list construction and a wider depth of field that we're going to see on the table, right?
So, broadly speaking, what we're about to go through is the if you played Magic, it's going to feel like a block rotation, because the way you sell product in any live game like this, or Diablo or whatever, is that you slowly power creep until a season end, and then you reset the power level, and that feels like it sucks, but you make the sucking period as small as you can, and that's what the indexes are for, is to just reduce the suck. That's why they're making the indexes free. And then you're going to start getting codex releases again, and then you're going to start the hype cycle all over again, which they've already actually started with the new Terminator models, right? You started the hype cycle all over again. So they're starting on the build up again. They're starting on the feel good again, and we haven't even got to the part where it hurts yet. When you start looking at the data sheets, and you see, all of the AP has reduced by a point or something, which is what we asked for 8 months ago. It's going to be an interesting time, and if you haven't been through it before, hold on to your butt, because it's a wild ride for a little while. Because when they release those indexes, it all comes at once, and so it is the wild, wild west, and everybody's trying to figure everything out. And you've got armies that are walking around with 120 cultists, and you've got armies that are walking around with 5 shock attack guns. So you don't know what you're going to see on a day-to-day basis if you happen to be at an event.
Will warn people on that same train of thought, if you've not gone through Index Hammer before. Index Hammer, it will be an era of spam, because they are removing special rules and stratagems and things that they've used to balance units that are in similar roles. So just the unit that is the most points efficient is all you will see generally at Index Hammer.
Yep, you're going to see the best data sheet you can take, and you're going to take as many of it as you can.
And that's going to be even more exacerbated with the way that this list construction looks like, right? With a lack of limitation to like the elite role or whatever. I still don't quite understand how this battlefield line scenario actually lines out.
So, looking at this and comparing it to AOS, because it does look like we are moving towards an AOS style rule set.
Sure.
How battle line functions is it's similar to the troop role. It's your required troop unit. Or required unit. In AOS at 2,000 points, you're required to play 3 battle line models, or battle line units.
Is that...
And depending on what sub-chapter you're playing and who your general is, can affect what your battle line is.
Okay, so that kind of ties into how Arcs of Omen is right now, right? Like where we can select it, except it's going to be more tailored to what that detachment or leader is.
Right, so something like in Marines, the Intercessor and the Infiltrators will be battle line no matter what. Say there is a Scout-focused detachment, and that will give Scouts battle line as well. And then after that, there's no battlefield role, so you just have to take your 3 battle line units, and then you can take whatever else you want.
So seems like no more limitation to. Well, let's call out Mr. Papa Smurf here, with his love of the Eternal Dreadnought. There's nothing to limit him then from taking whatever the prerequisite is of his X or Y detachment, and then just dropping in every frickin' Dreadnought he owns. Yeah.
Right, so the rule of 3 still applies.
Sure.
It's the rule of 3 for non-battle line. This is a key thing that I noticed that will be kind of interesting. They said battle line is capped at 6, so it's not infinite for troop choices anymore, but things that gain the battle line keyword will go up to a cap of 6 units of that.
So
let's say
no more rule of 3 for a battle line unit then, similar to like troops are, right?
Right.
Cool.
Well, cap is 6. Cap is 6 now. The cap is double for battle line.
Did they also not cap dedicated transports at 6?
It as well. But this could be really interesting for things like if there's a Blood Angel style detachment, and if you take Dante, maybe he makes Sanguinary Guard battle line, and all of a sudden you can take 60 Sanguinary Guard.
Let's go.
What's the thought process then for an army like Clowns? And I know we touched on this a little bit out of the show, obviously, Peyton. But do we think that the detachment for Clowns is just going to alter what that battle line is, since they're so troop and transport focused?
So I am very, very, very concerned for Harlequins in general with this new detachment. I am hoping one of 2 things occurs. Either they lose the Sadith keyword and just become Craftworld units.
Sure.
Or they get a special attachment that caps them at 9 troop choices and 9 transports. Either of those, and I think Harlequins are still very, very, very playable. Capping at 6 in a army with legitimately 7 data sheets is very challenging.
I mean, it kind of forces you into playing bikes and characters, right?
It will force you into that. It's just if the bikes aren't good, you have a dead codex.
Yeah, sure.
I think it's much more likely that they just become Craft Worlds units, because I don't think that GW is going to special snowflake anything in the indexes.
For sure. I was thinking when the Craft World book comes out this edition for the attachment thing.
Yeah, fair. But I mean, for however long it is that you're on Index Hammer, you're probably just going to be playing him as Craft Worlds units.
As somebody with only Clowns troops or only Clowns units from the Elves army, I dislike that.
Yeah, you're and Elves tend to get a mid-edition release.
Correct. I do assume that the release for indexes is a much faster release than it was for 9th. Keep in mind, the 9th release was still relatively quick, and we had a year and a half of COVID there.
Yeah, I was going to chime in that I think the 9th release schedule would have been a lot more expeditious if we hadn't had the COVID delays, right?
Yeah, they missed their entire year of splat books that they normally would get in the end of an edition.
Right.
But I do think that we're probably seeing 2 to 3 codexes a month out the gate. I'm actually hoping for 4 because
Wow, that's aggressive.
Being stuck on indexes feels bad.
And with as much as they're trying to push this competitive scene, like I hesitate to think that 4 a month is realistic. Of course, that's off of my limited experience, right? But also, I can totally understand the thought process behind that. Of we need to shoot these out as quick as possible. You know, like these books have to hit the table.
If they were trying to do 4 a month, there would be 8 in print right now.
Yes.
That is insane.
You got to imagine with the leaks that we've seen through this edition that we'd have heard of something at this point, right?
I mean, maybe. Who knows?
Unless that was all calculated.
One playable faction right now. If we stay with 2 a month, it is a full year for the last faction to get off of an index.
And that's if they hit every one of those releases, right? Like,
so that's where I'm coming from. Is they try to get people off of indexes as fast as possible. It did take about a year the last time they went through indexes. However, the beginning of 8th edition was still on the CEO where GW said that we do not make a rules company. We are a models company and randomly have rules to support it. We have thankfully moved on from that CEO to one that is much more worried about the game and worried about making sure the player base is happy.
Yes, that is definitely a difference.
So that is why I'm thinking it will be slightly faster than it was last time. Because playing with no rules effectively, like you have data sheets but no rules for 12 months, feels challenging.
Do we think that transition is mitigated a little bit by the special rules being migrated over to data sheets?
I understand that to an extent. I think in indexes you will have far less rules than you currently have.
So do we think that data sheets are going to actually look different to an extent from what they are in the index on release?
So, my thought process is you'll have very minimal rules in indexes. That's how it was last time.
Sure.
Most know that you had very, very, very minimal rules, and as you got codexes, you got your rules added back to you.
Okay.
Cox
does Index Hammer for a year feel more or less bad than trying to sell guard players another codex 10 months after their last one?
Poor guard.
I'm just saying.
What about World Eaters, though, dude?
Yeah, no, they're getting wrecked, too.
Do you not remember the Sisters release? They had 8.5 months.
Oh, yeah, no, I remember. But they also didn't really have a model range except in metal.
I mean, from 8th edition to 9th edition, they had 8.5 months of the book.
Oof.
That's still more than Guard. I mean, Guard's sitting at what? If from their actual book release outside of that limited edition box, they're going to be at almost 6 months before end of edition.
I mean, that's just because of how GW's sales cycle works. Some poor 4 factions at the end of the edition are going to be in that situation.
some poor turds that drew the short straw.
It consistently seems to be Guard. Guard gets the short straw a lot.
They had a very early book in 8. They had a long time with that book.
Look,
but
having a really early book is also not a blessing.
The other part of that, though, is they just got a whole model line refresh, and a lot of that's been super limited to acquire. So my heart goes out to the Guard player that is just finishing his model line and getting everything painted up and gets to get 2 solid events in before the codex changes to an index.
Oh, no. Don, I'm just going to point this out for you. So you remember how Necrons have been for most of this edition?
Hey, you shut your fucking dirty mouth, okay? I don't need this, right? I don't need this evil on me, Ricky Bobby, okay?
Yeah, they put opposite space range at the beginning of the edition, and guess who's up? It's your turn, buddy. It's your turn.
I'm aware, but, luckily for me, I have Tyranids and an equivalent amount of Necrons sitting on the shelves. So when the situation reverses, you'll just see me playing robots at the end of 10th.
Oh man, could you imagine if robots are broken this time? I do not want Resurrection Protocols to be good again. No, thank you.
I'm okay with it.
For me, it's like the meme where the guy's like sitting on like the gallows, or not, like with the noose around his neck. And he's like, "You not been here before, bro? First time?
First time, brother?"
It's like Marines are like always a part of the release. So it's like,
Sometimes you get a second book, and you always get splat books.
Yeah, you always get updates. Like, so, poor Necrons have been sitting just butt in the wind for like half the edition. Like,
no, they had a good update from Data Slate, but Marines do seem to have this like weird currents where they hit the peak at the start of the edition, and then roller coaster dive down to the bottom for the middle like 3 or 4 months of the edition.
Except for a couple sporadic chapters.
And they boost it back up.
Right.
But throughout that whole thing, Peyton, like that whole roller coaster down, there's always like 1 or 2 chapters that just like freaking eagle shoot to the top. They're just like, oh, now Blood Angels is super duper good for 3 weeks. Okay, now they're bad. Everybody bought all the Sanguinary Guard. We're sold out of Sanguinary Guard. Okay, Blood Angels can suck again. It's fine.
Yeah, you can tell when a quarter is going to close when GW starts trying to push Marine sales.
They release Desolation Squads, like, oh, buy this new Primaris Marine kit. It's totally different from the other ones.
Oh darn! I guess we need to inflate our sales for the end of the quarter. What Marine kits do we have kicking about? Let's make those good for a while.
Let's throw some Blade Guard vets in with the Lion here. It's because they're part of his kit and it's super important, and not because we had 5 million of them hanging out that nobody wanted. Okay?
Yeah, right. Yeah. What do we have 600 of sitting around in different places? Oh, is it Landspeeder Tornadoes that nobody bought for 2 editions? Okay, cool.
So speaking of that kind of thought process, do you guys think War Gear is going to be paid for this new edition?
Oh man, I hope so. I like the granularity of paying for War Gear. It gives you so many more levers to pull to tune the units, right? If I wanted to be paying with power level, I'd be playing Crusade.
Well, power level's going away, so that's not relevant, right? Like, power level is the thing of the past. No more power level. My qualm with... So, I see the value of paying for War Gear. Sure, right? However, what is the point of War Gear if it doubles the cost of the dang unit? It's not relevant then, right? Like, looking at 60 points for Venom Cannons on a Harpy, like, just take it off the data sheet. Nobody's paying for that.
10 points for a Power Claw and an 8-point model.
Yes, that's freaking bananas. Like, if we're going to do extra points for War Gear, sure, okay, but let's make it, like, reasonable. It doesn't need to be a flat 10 points for a Power Claw for every dang model, right? Like, sure, 10 points for the guy that costs 30, I'm in for it, right? 5 points for the dude that costs 8.
Yeah.
And they have different profiles now, too, so I think they can experiment with that, right? If you just have it flat out on the profile, that a Space Marine swings a chainsword at X instead of Y, and a guardsman swings it at Y instead of X, you can just make that arbitrarily cost more or less for that unit, right?
I mean, we've been talking about Space Marines for a while now, and we haven't mentioned, like, we're burying the lead, boys. We're burying the lead. Has anybody heard Games Workshop say the word Primaris since they announced 10th edition?
Just that it's tied into the Firstborn, right? That they're all the same?
Well, so I saw an interesting article on day of recording today. They showed the new lieutenant with oh god, he looks so cool, by the way. Anyways, just one, he's got a combi flamer, so that's super cool, and he's got like kind of tyrannic war vet vibes to it, which is really cool. But it wasn't marketed as a new like Primaris Phobos lieutenant. It was just a Phobos lieutenant. right? And then that person's like, that's kind of odd because every other time they've released a new lieutenant model that was Primaris, it's like, oh, look at this new Primaris lieutenant. Even the ones that were Primaris Reaver lieutenant, like it when all those came out, they were marketed that way. And anyways, he's like, oh, I'm just kind of curious. Since 10th, kind of the cat was out of the bag for 10th edition, like Games Workshop hasn't mentioned the word Primaris in a single article. So which leads me to believe that maybe a Marine is just a Marine. They're just an Adeptus Astartes model. They're not, Primaris or Firstborn or this or that. They're just Adeptus Astartes models, which I think would make things, one, a lot more granular, because right now, like, certain stuff can't go in transports because it doesn't have a keyword. And I think that limits the design space for the game. And then I think it also is really confusing, because if a new player rolls up and it's like, hey, I'm going to play with my cool new, Primaris Intercessors, and I'm going to put them in this Land Raider because Land Raiders are cool, because they are. And somebody then's like, hey, man, you can't actually do that because, they have the Primaris keyword. It's just off-putting. But hopefully that goes away, because that'll make things a lot more simplistic.
It's very immersion breaking to not be able to put your spaceman in their spaceman truck. Like, it makes no sense. How many Primaris lieutenants do you own, Ward?
So there are actually 15 lieutenant models. That includes like the Dark Angel one and the Blood Angel one and a Space Wolf one and I think one other. But out of the 11, I'm only missing 3.
Inquiring minds had
but that's including the new like Phobos lieutenant that's coming out, like, because that will be owned immediately.
So you're missing 2 and the as yet unreleased one.
No, 3. I'm missing the Warhammer World 2021, like the Blade Guard lieutenant one, the 500-year anniversary lieutenant, which is like way too much on eBay. That's why I don't have it. And then the Shadow Spear lieutenant, which is just like a couple bucks on eBay. I just haven't managed to acquire it.
Noted. That has been noted for later. Very good. Huh. Well, does anybody else have anything groundbreaking or revolutionary to say about 10th edition other than I hope they don't fuck it up?
Absolutely. I take extreme offense as a Tyranids player to the fact that the only uniquely freaking Xenos or opposition outfitted lieutenant that shows up in the Space Marine line is he's got Tyranid carapace on him. He's got the wrong colored Tyranid blood. So offended. They've cut me so deep, and it just hurts to my core, and I don't understand why they would do that to us in this edition.
Oh, Don, you just wait.
I'm not going to wait.
I've already told Sean. I was like, I've been inspired today. And he goes, oh? I'm going to fully convert a 10-man squad of tyrannic war veterans.
I hate this, but also I just clipped all of the bits off of my Tyranid sprues, so I will send you bits, you piece of... My good friend.
Since we're talking about tyrannic war veterans, I would like to point out that they are still one of the most efficient units in 9th edition.
Just that unit is
just back when NIDs were like mega good.
Get out of here! I don't want to hear anything from you, Ward. You were the bane of my existence during my prime as NIDs.
Like, points per wound, those dudes are so cheap.
Those are the stupid shield sword guard dudes that just run way too fast, right? Like,
no, they're 2-wound Marine bodies, but they're just cheaper than Marines.
With a +1 to hit against Tyranid models.
Yeah.
Have I told you today how much I hate you, Ward?
Hate the player, hate the game.
Oh. And on that note, Don, hit the exit music.
I certainly will. Thanks, everybody.
If you're still with us, maybe there was something in this podcast that you enjoyed, so please consider clicking like, commenting, and clicking that subscribe button.